Abderramán performed the last of the Umayyads pursued by his until recently subjects Abbasids arrived in Al-Andalus to create his own emirate and end the Christians. It was time to launch the attack. Year 759 after Christ, Abderramán Faros, after having finished off a large part of his opponents on the peninsula, decided to send an army to recover part of the territories that the Christians had snatched from the Muslims. During the Great Berber Revolt and the subsequent years of weakness, here above I leave you the link to the Great Berber Revolt, which allowed Alfonso I to expand his kingdom. This army was led by the emir's son Umar. Fruela I gathered his troops and left from Cangas de Onís to Galicia, the target of the Muslims. Fruela led his men swiftly to stand in Umar's way, so that it would be the Christians who chose the battlefield. Fruela positioned himself near present-day Pontevedra, and there he decided to wait for the Muslim posts. Finally, Umar arrived and a pitched battle took place, the Battle of Pontubio, which ended with a Christian victory and the loss of a large part of the Muslim army. Umar was captured and brought before Fruela. The Christian king, following the tradition that prevailed at that time in history, beheaded Umar and sent his head to his father Abderramán, as a warning of what would happen if the Muslims decided to attack the kingdom of Asturias again. Now that the earthly plane was secured, he decided to fight on the spiritual plane. He declared war on Arianism, strengthening Christianity. He forbade priests to marry and forced those who were already married to renounce either their habits or their wives. To further demonstrate the identification of the Kingdom of Asturias with Christianity, he created a bishopric and built a series of religious buildings in Oviedo, founding that city. And just when it seemed he had appeased all fronts, a new problem arose. In the east, the Basques rebelled against his power. Why? Most likely, they felt their loyalty was with Alfonso I, not with the Kingdom of Asturias, so when he died, the king died, the pact was over. Whatever the reason, Fruela found himself obliged to take his army, which had just returned from fighting the Moors, and march east. The Asturian army arrived in Alava and crushed the rebel army. But of course, if he wanted the Basques to be loyal to him, he couldn't rule with terror. The maxim that they hate me as long as they fear me only works if the monarch's power is very, very large, something that was not the case in the Kingdom of Asturias. As he was still single, he decided to marry Doña Muña, an Arab noblewoman. Thanks to this marriage, blood ties were created between the king and the Basques, which would presumably prevent the Basques from rebelling again. That same year, a serious conflict arises for the Muslims on the other side of the Pyrenees. It turns out that the Franks wanted to definitively expel the Moors from Gaul and establish themselves as the hegemonic force. They launched an attack against Narbonne, wiping out the few Muslim defenders that were there. And after capturing Narbonne, thanks to a betrayal of the Goths to the Muslims, the Franks became masters and lords of all Gaul. After the Battle of Tours or Poitiers, the Muslim presence in Gaul had been greatly affected. And now they had dealt them a coup de grace. Let's now return to the peninsula as problems follow one after another. It turns out that Fruela was quite unpleasant and made enemies daily. The problem comes from the fact that he had a brother who was more likable. And of course, Fruela's enemies became friends with his brother. Bimarano Fruela began to see conspiracies everywhere, all pointing to his brother Bimarano. It is unknown whether the conspiracies were real or just paranoia. The fact is that in the year 765 after Christ, Fruela cold-bloodedly murdered his brother. This caused a stir among his subjects, and the Galicians took the opportunity to rebel, demanding more autonomy. Fruela once again gathered his troops and headed west to crush this new rebellion. He arrived in Galicia, confronted the rebels, and crushed the rebellion in one fell swoop. And again, another problem. It turns out that in 766, Abderramán had already ended both rebellions on the peninsula, while he had destroyed his opponents. So he was ready for a new campaign against the Christians. If you want to know about the civil wars of the Muslims on the peninsula, that is, Abderramán against Berbers, Abbasids, Yemenis, and along etc., leave a bunch of likes on the video and why not? Take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. If you see that this video gets spread and a good number of likes, I will tell you about these internal wars. The fact is that Abderramán was gathering a new army again, this time led by his right-hand man. A man who had been with him through all the wars that Abderramán had fought in Al-Andalus. His name was Badr Abderramán. He had no interest in venturing into the Duero area as it is now known as the Duero Desert. That is a depopulated area with no loot. As a result of the actions of the Asturian king, Alfonso V, here above I leave you a link to the video of how this desert was created. Abderramán sent his hosts to the western flank of the kingdom of Asturias. Bad began his journey northwest and in the area of Burgos and Alava defeated the Asturian forces that were sent to stop him. Thanks to this victory, the Muslims looted the area and imposed tributes on all the cities and villages in the area. It seemed that the Emirate of Cordoba would be able to recover the lands taken by the Christians years before. With this idea in mind and taking advantage of the morale boost this victory had given his men, he ordered the army to now attack the western end of the kingdom of Asturias, again avoiding the Duero area. The Muslims entered Galicia advancing along the Minho River, for that's where the juiciest spoils would be. Remember that large cities appear next to water sources. However, Fruela was determined to avoid losing the west of the kingdom. He set off with his troops to the west and went straight to meet the Muslim army. No data is known about the battle, neither the numbers of the armies, nor tactics, nor place. It is only known that the Christians crushed the Muslims and they had to return to the emirate without loot. And now yes, with low morale. It seems that the news of this victory spread throughout the kingdom of Asturias. For the eastern territories, which had been forced to pay tributes to the Muslims, stopped doing so, now again confident in the power of the Christian armies. It seemed that now, after crushing one Vascon rebellion or another Galician one, rejecting two Muslim invasions, and stopping a blind conspiracy of his own brother, he could know peace. Well, no, the memory of Bimarano, his brother, would be his new problem. It turns out that those who had supported Bimarano in the alleged conspiracy that he was leading were resentful of Fruela and wanted to eliminate him at all costs. But of course, to avoid a civil war, they had to assassinate the king and name another, very quickly, so that no one had time to think too much. They found the ideal candidate, Aurelio, cousin of Fruela and Bimarano, nephew of King Alfonso V. In the year 768 after Christ, the whole family was in Cangas de Onís, which had become a hornet's nest where each faction wanted to impose itself over the others. It turns out that Fruela Tavres at 46 years old was murdered by those close to him. Quickly, over the still warm body of the monarch, the conspirators named Aurelio Valle as king. Do you remember Doña Munia, Fruela's wife? Yes, seeing what had happened to her husband, she quickly left Cangas de Onís with her two sons as she knew what awaited them, certain death. And who were her two sons, Alfonso and Jimena? They were sent to the monastery of Samos, south of Lugo, where they would presumably be safe, protected by the church and, above all, by anonymity. Well, no one would say who they were until the ideal time came. Fruela was buried in Oviedo and later joined by his wife Doña Munia, the new monarch. Well, we better leave it for the next video.